Welcome back. The Cross River State government is appealing to the federal government to extend the services of Operation Delta Save to the state to stem the recent increase in crime. The state governor, Ben Ayade, made the call in Calabar, the state capital, after a 5-hour intensive security meeting with service commanders.
One of the major responsibilities of any government is its ability to ensure the safety of lives and property of its citizenry. Following the recent surge in criminal activities in Cross River State, the state government says it's not leaving anything to chance. So all heads of security agencies converge at the government house to strategize over this matter. After the closed-door session, it's time to communicate the outcome of the meeting to the media.
It became very clear that we needed an emergency SOS report to the President and Commander-in-Chief to extend and plead that Operation Delta Save must be extended to cover Cross River State. Until that is done, otherwise Cross River State will be a lone state standing alone without security cover, while the entire Niger Delta is covered by Operation Delta State.
To ensure effective policing, increasing the security budget and the provision of logistics is part of the plan, especially for the Calabar city centre. While assuring the citizens of their safety, Governor Ayade sued for cooperation with security agencies by availing them with useful information. He said some criminals who have been arrested will face the full wrath of the law to serve as a deterrent.
We have also realized that courtism has been on the increase. We are therefore, as government, going to take deliberate steps to ensure that any person who is in court of any form and is in government must be thrown out. One thing I can assure every single Cross Riverian, that for every incident that has occurred, the combined team have been able to trace and track the culprits. As we speak, the last incident that occurred, 17 of the criminals have been picked up and they have started confessing. The 3 kingpins that I know, we have identified their homes, we have the coordinates of their armory, we have a clear picture of their modus operandi, and we are working on a massive attack.
With all the plans in place, a full implementation would mean criminals in the state will obviously be on the run.
Reactions have started trailing the rulings of the Federal High Court Abuja and the judgment of the Federal High Court Owerri on the governorship seat in Abia State. The two key parties in the case have different interpretations of the various rulings delivered by the court. While the team of Dr. Uche Oga campaign organization says the coast is now clear for him to be sworn in, the team of Abia State Governor Pt.3 says the most recent judgment, which was delivered in Owerri, should be obeyed.
From Abuja to Owerri, it's been one court ruling followed by another judgment as the legal battle continues to determine the governor of Abia State. The Federal High Court in Owerri is said to have ruled that Governor Ekpeazu's tax documents were not forged, pointing out that the plaintiff was unable to prove that the tax documents were forged. A spokesman of the Dr. Uche Oga campaign organization says this is in favor of their candidate, a position the Ekpeazu side disputes.
To us, that is victory for all the parties concerned, particularly Dr. Oga, because by the pronouncement of the Federal High Court in Abuja, which has already disqualified Dr. Ekpeazu, it means that Uche Oga is the governor of Abia State today.
And yesterday, the Federal High Court in Owerri gave this judgment and said the tax papers in so-called controversy, I know were controversial. They're authentic, and Dr. Ekpeazu is and remains the governor of Abia State. That was a definite certain pronouncement. So there's no way you can say that was in their favor or in the favor of Dr. Oga.
The two sides also disagree on the implication of the ruling delivered by Justice Okon-Abang in the Federal High Court Abuja. While the Uche Oga team sees it as a victory for them, the Ekpeazu team says the judgment that stands now is that of the Owerri High Court.
I believe that the rulings concerning stay of execution today the way the court gave its ruling has cleared the way for, may I say, His Excellency Dr. Ochoaga to be sworn in as the governor of Abia State, because there's nothing again restraining that, because there's nothing to stay. He has gotten the certificate of return.
On the same issue, the Owerri, on the same issue, examine the same tax papers, the same Federal High Court. Now, you cannot disregard the judgment of that court that was given yesterday and go and choose the earlier judgment.
Wow.
You have to deal with the most recent.
With different reactions and interpretations trailing these judgments and rulings, it is clear that once again, the courts may have to come to the rescue with a decision that will be accepted by all parties concerned. Lanre Lasese, Channels Television News.
A bill for an act to provide for the establishment, presentation and control of national grazing reserves and livestock routes, sponsored by Senator Zainab Kure of the PDP, Niger South, recently went through second reading on the floor of the Senate. Some senators threw their weight behind the creation of a national grazing redress the recurring clashes between Fulani nomads and farmers in the country. Leading the debate on the general principles of the bill, Senator Zainab Kure stressed that the federal government could acquire land for such purposes from any state of the federation by giving notice to the state government on the desire and purpose of acquiring such land. Tonight we look at the powers of the government to acquire state lands and the practical implications of the bill. Joining us to make sense of it is a legal practitioner and a consultant on issues of law and governance, Mr. Fola Athawari. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining me on the News at 10.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this grazing bill actually seeks to create space, and to do that, the government must acquire land. What essentially does it mean to create grazing land, and by which authority will government acquire such lands?
Well, I suppose one must look at it from the practicality. Obviously, the private member that sponsored it sees it as a problem that needs to be resolved. And let's face it, cattle is a national asset. It isn't some, alien beast walking across the land. We all eat beef. So it is deserving of consideration, but it's whether the proposed bill is practicable. Now, they talk about grazing reserves, which means land, and then routes, which means land. Now, hardly any land in Nigeria is unencumbered, hardly, whether by federal, state, or private individuals who are derivatives of the state. But I think that the first thing we ask is, what are the powers of acquisition? Now, up until 1978, with the promulgation of the Land Use Decree, then now Act, the federal government could acquire land in any part of Nigeria under the Public Lands Acquisition Act, which was a colonial offshoot of the Crown Lands, etc., where they could, for developmental purposes, acquire land, pay compensation. So, and they still have some of these lands. The second phase is the Land Use Act, which came in 1978, which stripped the federal government of the power to acquire land anywhere in Nigeria and vested the lands in the states in governors. And we must remind ourselves that the Constitution recognizes Nigeria as constituting the 36 states and the FCT. So the federal government is really an agent of this Constitution. In the states, as I said, the governors have the power to acquire land and to allocate land, to allocate exclusively. So the federal government's power in relation to land is reserved or limited to lands acquired prior to 1978, such as lands they use for barracks, for ports, etc.
So that's
essentially the legal structure.
Practically, we're talking about that.
So the bill seems to be in conflict with the existing state of the law.
Because there's been this argument that it's been more emotional and religious based, and not looking at it in a practical term.
Yes.
So As it is now, and looking at it that we're in a democratic setting,
that's right.
Can the federal government go ahead and decide which land it wants to acquire?
It can identify land that it desires. And if that land is outside of its own previously acquired land, it has to apply to the governor. And the governor is at liberty to say yes or no. So I think that the emotion, to me, does not rest on any legitimate fear. It doesn't, because the people, I get texts, I get all manner of, really aggressive and emotive texts. Most of them are misinformed. Oh, it's a plan to Islamize Nigeria. I can't make the connection. I just can't make the connection. So unless the Constitution is amended to remove the Land Use Act from its comforting embrace, and unless the Land Use Act itself is then subsequently amended, I find it virtually impracticable for the Grazing Commission, as proposed, to exercise the powers that they purport to put in it. But, it's a question now. Again, we must remind ourselves that to amend the Constitution, you need two-thirds of the majority in two-thirds of the houses of assembly in Nigeria, plus a majority in. So this idea that it's one side seeking to impose its will is just unrealistic. It's going to, if there's any solution along the lines of the grazing bill, and with some amendments, it's going to necessarily be a collective enterprise. And let us face it, cows are, if you're going to bury somewhere in many parts of the South, you buy cows. So, we have to find, Nigeria loves to, to allow problems to fester for so long before they, deal with it. So, for me, those are, I think, the key issues,
Mr. Fola
Yes.
Afawari, thank you so much for joining me on the News at 10. Let's cross over now to our business studios, where Anne Wanwado is standing by with the day's business news. Thank you, Harriet. Welcome to Business News. The central bank is processing a set of guidelines that will help protect banking and other financial services data in Nigeria. Well, according to the Director, Banking and Payment System, Mr. Dipo Fatokun, these guidelines are currently at the formulation stage. He says this will protect the banking system against electronic frauds when completed.
The committee submitted this report, and it has been given further work to do to come up with policies that will assist the banks and other players in the financial services industry on cloud computing. Another committee that was set up was a committee that considered the issue of fraud at merchant locations, how some merchants may collude with some fraudsters, how some merchants may not be aware that a fraudster is using their channel to commit fraud, and how such merchants and the acquirers, that is the banks, can protect themselves. So those are some of the things we have considered this year. And our normal pattern is that the forum comes together to deliberate, to discuss and agree. And after that agreement, we go back with policy formulation, which is escalated to the Committee of Governors of the Central Bank, led by the Governor, Godwin Emefiele, and they consider whatever proposals we bring that will make the payment system to be safer.
It was a short trading week owing to the 3-day holiday declared by the federal government to commemorate Eid al-Fitr. But by the close of trading on Friday, the bears dominated the local bourse, with the benchmark index closing 1.54% lower at 28,854 points. The market capitalization also declined to 9.91 trillion naira. Total volume of shares traded dropped to 377.80 million, with a value of 3.64 billion naira, exchanged in 7,466 deals. Market breadth was negative, with only 9 gainers against 48 losers. Owando was the top gainer with 20.33%, while Skybank led the laggards table with 17.14%.
FBN Holdings, GT Bank and Axis Bank collectively accounted for 32.38% of total volume traded during the week. At the interbank market, the overnight lending rate rose by 338 basis points to 7.79% for the week. The one-month rate also rose by 13 basis points to close at 10.96%, while the 3-month and the 6-month rates fell to 13.14% and 14.79% each. Market liquidity had opened at 167.26 billion naira. That was on Friday. But of course, the money market went into repo after the central bank sold treasury bills, which significantly reduced the level of cash in the banking system. This pushed up cost of borrowings among the banks. Dealers expect rates to remain pressured next week as system liquidity remains strained. That's business news for this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Anne Ouawado. Back to you, Harriet.